Greetings to our kings, queens, and everyone in between. Welcome to Melanin Muses.
Mindful knowledge, healing heart. We are your muses.
Cleo.
And Calliope, but you can call me Callie. We're here to give you a safe space to open your mind
and to heal your heart while adding a dash of melanin flavor.
Disclaimer: we are not legal, mental, or health professionals. Although we're actively researching the topics we discuss and fact-checking our resources, please note that we are only giving our opinions and not professional advisory.
If you wish to get professional advice, please seek out the help of a certified professional or therapist. Let us begin. All right, welcome to the first episode of Melanin Muses. I'm super excited. How about you, Callie?
Oh my goodness, I've been waiting for this for so long. We get to speak our minds.
It's been a couple months. We're like, yeah, we're gonna do this, and then Corona and life happens, but we're here, and that's all that matters. So let's get started with a quote of the day. Now, a trigger warning for anyone who might be sensitive to this particular topic. We will be discussing the topic of sexual consent, which might touch upon the topics of rape, sexual assault, things of that nature. So if that's something that's very close to you, please be forewarned about this ahead of time. So the quote of today will be, silence does not mean yes. No can be thought and felt, but never said. It can be screamed silently on the inside. It can be in the wordless stone of a clenched fist, fingernails digging into the palm, her lips sealed, her eyes closed, his body just taking, never asking, never taught to question silence. And this is from the Nowhere Girls by Amy Reed. Very, very deep quote that seemed to definitely fit the theme today. So what are your thoughts about this, Callie?
It's definitely a visual representation of what it feels like to be trapped or stifled, or to have your voice taken away in a moment where you feel powerless. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who can relate to that sensation, just not having their boundaries respected.
Most definitely. And it's unfortunate that obviously this can happen to both men and women. It can happen to both genders, everyone in between. But this specific episode, we can talk about specifically toward heterosexual women, because I'm just going to speak from my experience, and if you can speak from your experience. I don't want to put words in the mouth of anyone else who has other representation. So this is just our experiences that we're talking about. I feel that, I even watched an episode from the Red Table Talk discussing this, about the gray area of consent and how that's something that's just so a heated topic nowadays. Some people say yes or no, there's no in between. However, I personally do believe there is that gray area of, there are physical representations of a no that many men do seem to ignore simply because they want to get off, and they just put it out of their brain like, oh, well, she's here, she's naked, so she wants it. And I know for the haters out there who are going to try to come at me about this, I know this is not every single male. There are exemptions from everything, just like with any opinion, but this is specifically speaking of those men who purposely ignore those signs and do not check in with their partner. So what are your thoughts about that, Callie?
I have a strong belief that many people are raised on the nonverbal communication. We're taught from a young age that when someone wants a kiss, you're supposed to lean into them and kind of bridge that gap. Most people will reciprocate if they're interested. Other people will turn their head away to signal that they're not interested in that. And of course, it hurts your feelings if you misread a signal. But at the same time, that is a moment to kind of reflect on what you thought you were seeing, and also check in with your partner saying, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to misread that. Or are you okay? Did I do X, Y, and Z? And
Mm-hmm.
then 9 times out of 10, the person will tell you. But I think, particularly in America, many of our romantic expectations are reflected in media,
Mm-hmm.
where it's romantic to, if a girl tells you no, a man tells a man no, and he pursues her anyway, eventually wearing her down to the point where she says, oh, you tried so hard and you fought for me. In many cases, that's not it. If she says no, that means no. And
Mm-hmm.
don't be confused. A solid no is a no, and anything that indicates anything other than no is
Mm-hmm.
a no. I want to touch on a lesson that I learned a while ago. If it's not a hell yes, it's a hell
Mm-hmm.
no.
Yes, 100%. And it's crazy because it's so annoying and it's frustrating, infuriating that the quote unquote automatic consent, y'all can't see me, but I'm doing the air quotes with my fingers, the automatic consent that is quote unquote given. So like they're saying if you invite a man into your home, oh, that's already consenting that you want to have sex with him. No, that's saying, hey, I want to hang out with you because I think you're cool. It's not like I want your dick. You know what I mean? It's just that's not the case. And even they're saying, well, if you start kissing him and stuff like that, that's automatic consent that you want to go all the way. That is not the consent. That's just saying, hey, I'm feeling you. I'm feeling the vibe. Maybe I do want to kiss you. But unless I tell you yes, that I want to be in bed with you and I want to be intimate with you, then that is a no, unless we get that mutual consent. But people seem to think that just because you get to a certain point, it's your consent. And this is a thing, like the gray area that I learned about that really resonated with me because of my previous experiences and kind of blew my mind about it, is that a lot of us women, like obviously other people can feel the same way too, but from my experience, it's like we're taught that if we get to a certain level, we
Mhm.
can't say no. It's like,
Yeah.
well, we already got to this level. Well, he's already here. He's already in my bed. Like I can't say no now. Like I don't want to do this. Like I'm not feeling it. I feel uncomfortable, but he's already on top of me. So I don't feel like I can say no right now, or I'm afraid to say no because what if he just tries to take advantage of me? I might as well just let this happen. It will be less problematic if I just let it happen and get over it rather than cause a scene,
Mhm.
And I can say that from personal experience, like that's happened to me several times with partners where it got to a point where it's like, I don't feel comfortable with this person, but I felt too afraid to say something
Mhm.
because they're a man, they're physically stronger than me. And I'm like, will I get hit? Because I have been hit in the past. I'm like, will I be hit if I say no? Because it's already gotten to this far, even if I feel uncomfortable. And I know there's been other women who've been in that same predicament of, can I say no? Can I fight him back if something goes wrong or something goes south? Or even if you go out for a drink with the girls, you know what I mean? Like back before COVID, men, it's like there's some men out there who's like, oh, well, you're here at the bar, you looking cute, so that gives me reason I can touch your butt because you're dressing that way. That is not
No, not at all.
consent.
No,
Like,
certainly
what are
not.
your thoughts about that? Because especially here in Korea, because for y'all don't know, I'm living in Korea, so it's a completely different culture for me. It's like it's that ungiven, unspoken consent that if a woman goes into a club here, especially a foreigner, if we go into a club, if we go into a bar, it's automatic consent that men can touch us however we want. And trust and believe how many times I almost got into an altercation with a man for touching me inappropriately here. So, like, what are your thoughts
Mhm.
about that?
Oh my goodness. So, kind of circling back to what you were talking about with once you get to a certain point, that's supposed to be assumed that everything will continue to progress.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you grew up with this as well, but do you remember the four bases?
Yeah, like first base is like with
Mhm.
hand holding, second base is like kissing, third base is
Yes.
something, and home run is if you go all the way.
Yeah. So, depending on where you were brought up, those
Hmm.
bases have different meanings in the progression of a romantic scenario. So,
Hmm.
like you were saying, first base could be kissing or hand holding. Second base could be heavy petting or manual stimulation through clothing. Then
Mhm.
third base could be oral stimulation
Mhm.
from either partner.
Mhm.
Home run is penetrative sex.
Mhm.
Now, of course, even in baseball, there's no guarantee that you'll get a home run. You can make
Mhm.
all the bases, but you can also strike out. So
Mhm.
that's just an analogy that I like to use when I think of consent is just like anything else, nothing is guaranteed. So at any time, consent can be removed.
Mhm.
And with a mature person, with an
Mhm.
emotionally stable person, they
Mhm.
understand that because their needs aren't going to supersede your comfort.
Mhm.
So I am not a fan of situations where you find yourself with another person and things are progressing pretty hot and heavy. But at any
Mhm.
moment, if you feel like it's not meant to be, it doesn't even matter what the reason is. If you say no or you're giving indications that you're not into it, like they're trying to put their hand where you don't want it and you move their hand away, you get up and kind of leave the room to go somewhere else. you know there are nonverbal signals that indicate
Mhm.
that someone is not interested, and when
Mhm.
they're not interested, you don't question it, you just leave it alone, you drop it.
Mhm.
And I think this is something that a lot of young men aren't taught from an
Mhm.
early age. They're taught that if it's something they want, they must pursue it.
The
Eventually,
hunters,
yes,
the hunter
exactly.
mentality.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it'll yield
Mhm.
eventually if you chase it down, if you run it down hard enough. But
Mhm.
that's completely removing the autonomy that the other person has, and the just the agency that they have when it comes to their own body and their own rights as a person.
Mhm.
So I have taken various martial arts over the years
Mhm.
because of my very strict and restrictive protection of my body.
Mhm.
To my knowledge, now this may be a repressed memory if it did happen, but I cannot recall actively situations where I've been touched against my will.
Mhm.
But I do know that I do have an inherent disdain for people invading my personal space.
Mhm.
So much so that it's automatic. If someone touches me without my consent, I am more likely to react than I am to have a conversation about it. I'm not going to confront you and say, "Why did you do that? Keep your hands away from me." No, you're going to get hit. Point blank, period. That's just what's going to happen. And if you have any
Mhm.
questions about it, ask yourself what you did to get hit.
Mhm.
And not everybody has that capacity. And I'm well aware of that, which is why it's so
Mhm.
important for people from a young age to be taught your body is your own, and you are
Mhm.
the only person that can do what you want with your body. One weird thing, too, is I'm going to talk about like Black households in particular.
Okay, I think you're going to
I
talk
think
about the
I
thing
think
that I
we
wanted to mention. Yeah, we're talking about the
yes.
same. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead. Go, 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 go. On the same
There
wavelength about this.
exactly. There is some very strange uh, perpetuated belief within the community
Mm.
that when a family member approaches you for affection, as a
Mhm.
child, you are not allowed to deny them. So, say you have an uncle or an aunt that is visiting the home for a holiday. The
Mhm.
parents will say, "Go give so and so a kiss or a hug." And even if the child is showing very, vocally and through their expression that they don't want that kind of interaction with that family member, they're forced to do it anyway because the parents don't want to be embarrassed. The parents don't want that they're like, "No, you're a child. You do what I say."
Mm.
So children automatically are taught that they have no autonomy in
Mhm.
many cases. Now, I'm not going to say that this is every Black household, but I'm going to say in many cases within the culture, I've witnessed this.
Yeah.
And I have seen it in media. I have seen it across the board in various circumstances where this is the case. And I have a very strong suspicion that this is why moving forward, a lot of adults don't have those same boundaries or that sense of entitlement to their own person. What do you
Yes.
think? What do you think?
No, girl, like I 100% agree with that simply because like I don't remember personally any experiences about the whole forcing to hug somebody when I didn't want to. I don't remember that from my experience, luckily, but I do hear a lot of that and see a lot of that of like, oh, well, that's your auntie, you have to, or that's your
Mhm.
uncle, you have to. And I'm like, no, because like you said, mentioned earlier, you are teaching that child, especially if it's a girl, but even little boys too, that they don't have control over their bodies. They don't have the right to say no. And you just see it on their faces and it breaks my heart if they don't
Mm.
want to do it. And that's what people don't understand. Like, oh, they're a kid, they won't remember. It's like, no, kids remember. People can remember things super, super young, or even remember the emotional attachment to that or flashbacks, even if they can't
Mhm.
fully comprehend it. That stuff sticks with them until they're older. And this is the biggest issue, is like people tiptoe so much around the topic of sex, about the topic of consent, because they don't want to have the conversation that, oh crap, maybe I did something in the past relationship. They don't want to own up to, oh, maybe I took advantage of this person or took advantage of that person in my
Exactly.
past. They don't want to own up to that. And the biggest thing when it comes to consent, you have to teach kids this young. So when they grow up, they fully understand and comprehend no or yes. And even teaching kids about consent, like, okay, is it okay that mommy hugs you, or is it okay that
Mhm.
can I hold your hand, or would you like a hug, or asking the kids yes or no questions. Would you like this, would you like that? Some people are like, oh, that's a baby and you shouldn't do that, and blah 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 blah. But at the same time, I'm like, you are training like this little human how to behave as an adult. And if
Yep.
you could say, oh, children should be seen, not heard, you are
Mm.
forever a child, you don't have an opinion, children should be seen, like, you are teaching the child that their opinions and their voices do not matter, you
Exactly.
know? Like,
Mhm.
I've heard that you're a child, your opinion doesn't matter, or you can't talk to me like that because you're beneath me, you're a kid. I've had that told to me by family.
Mhm.
And like, I'm 28 and I'm still learning how to unprogram that from the back of my brain, because all I remember is just, oh crap, I can't speak up now. Because so when
Mhm.
I'm in the presence of other adults, quote unquote, who are like in their 30s or 40s or 50s, it's hard for me to vocalize my thoughts and my opinions, because in the back of my mind, they are labeled as the adult or the older persons that I have to respect.
Mhm.
But what I'm actively working on is like, you know what? You don't get respect. Like, you get basic, decent human respect. But
Mhm.
if you are disrespectful, you don't deserve that back. I
Yep.
might give it to you just to be a decent person, but at the end of the day, I will speak my mind. And that's something that's taking a long time and lots of therapy to try to work through and work past. And for the next generation, it's something we should teach these kids. Like, even in interactions with men, it's difficult for me to vocalize because I was never taught as a kid to, this is like, you, if you're feeling uncomfortable around a man, you say no, and no is no, and you can leave anytime you want to. I
Mhm.
wasn't taught how to interact with males. And I've been told like, oh, well, that's self-explanatory, you should already know.
No,
and,
there's no
and
such thing.
there's no such thing. Like, oh, it's common sense. I'm like, no, that's not common sense. That's something that you are taught growing up, of how to be respected, how your standards should be. And if you don't learn that from a parent, if you don't learn that from the family you are surrounded by, that is something you have to learn the hard way, by going through hard experiences, being in difficult situations and being like, wow, I don't want to be in that situation anymore. That was not okay. And you have to work and process through that. So I think that's one of the biggest issues today, is that we coddle children way too much. Like, oh, well, they're a kid, we can't teach them about sex, we can't teach them about this. I'm like, listen, don't go and show them porn. Like, that's
Yeah.
not what we're talking about. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about teaching them the proper terms for the penis and for the vagina, teaching
Oh,
them about their anatomy, teaching them
yes.
about, okay, like, we know, especially in America, we know kids are starting to engage in sexual intercourse at younger ages.
Oh my
Babies are
goodness.
having babies. It's a
Oh,
problem in and of itself. But you know what? It's our responsibility as a community to be like, listen, I understand if you, it's your decision whether or not you want to engage in this, but I advise that you wait until you are older, but if you do make this decision with your own body to engage in this, here are the tools I can arm you with so you are safe. Here's knowledge about STDs. Here's knowledge about how to use protection. Here's knowledge about how to get your own pleasure as a male or a female.
You can't see us, but we're high-fiving right now.
So yeah, I think that when it comes to teaching children, we have to be very cognizant of teaching them from a young age. Just like I said before, their the proper terminology for body parts, consent, like, can I hug you? Is that okay? Can mommy have a hug? Can daddy have a hug? Do you want to hug this person? No, then that's perfectly okay. But also establishing boundaries with those said family members or foreign, like people who aren't even family, like, listen, if they don't want to hug you, they don't have to. You know, some people get offended, like, oh my God, but their child, I want to hug them. I was like, well, if they don't want to hug you, they don't have to, and you need to respect that. And parents need to be able to not be afraid of what other people think of them for establishing those boundaries, because once you set an example for your child that, oh, it's okay to have boundaries, that is going to stay with them into adulthood. Because how do we expect them to act or have proper boundaries as an adult if we don't ensure that they see that growing up? And having all the tools and resources about sexual health and like STDs, and how to not only practice it safely, but also learn how to get their own enjoyment out of it. But that's a totally different conversation for consent, because consent should be from both parties, not just like, well, she looked at me a certain way. I'm like, yeah, but I can look at you side-eyed and you still won't go away. So at the end of like, and I think the best example is when it came to, I watched an interview about Amber Rose, and she's a strong advocate in terms of the fight for consent and proper education around it. And she was discussing how, for those of you who don't know, she was, I think, the former wife of Wiz Khalifa, if I'm not mistaken.
As
And
well
she,
as her profession. She was also an adult entertainer.
okay, yes, that too.
And that's a big piece of that too, is that people don't tend to respect other people who are in the adult entertainment industry. That's a big issue with consent as well. But yes, please continue.
Girl, yes, that's a whole nother conversation. We gotta have a podcast about that.
Please.
But she has a son, which I really loved when she talked about this. It's like she has a son, excuse me, who came up behind her one day and just started playing with her butt, just like because she got curious, because he was a little young tyke, and he just started saying, ooh, something is squishy. And she turned to him, she's like, hey, I know that you're playing, I know you're not doing anything wrong, but I want to let you know that's mommy's private area. You cannot touch that. Please do not touch me there. That is not okay. And I do not feel comfortable with it, especially without my permission. You don't do that. And he's like, okay. And he apologized and he fully acknowledged that. And what she's being an advocate about doing is ensuring that her sons know about consent. Yes, no, what no means, and just how to respect women. Because this all starts from childhood. And even this one guy they interviewed, he was a former football player. He was discussing about all he knows growing up is that women are targets. Like, you're supposed to, like, you have to get to that end goal. Your primary focus is to get to sex. So do whatever you can to get her to a yes. And he even said how crazy it is, how much that's instilled into men growing up, rather than the art of consent. So yeah, like it's just a crazy world where we have just been so comfortable with, oh, well, just go through with it, both on the men and the women's side, that the idea of actually asking permission is just very, you're like, oh, it ruins the mood. I'm like, no, it's, that actually will make you, hey, like, that gets me excited. I'm like, you asked me permission? Okay, let's go, honey, let's go. And it's like, it sets a standard. And unfortunately, at least from personal experience, it's like I didn't realize how used to I was for men to try and touch me without my permission. It just became normal because I gotten so used to that, especially being in Korea as a foreign woman and whatever. I've had people touch me without my permission all the time. And even if I was just sitting at a place eating, like, someone will touch my ass, you know, and it's just like, what the heck? And it's just it's not okay. And it's, my instinct is is a completely different story. Like, I don't want to get into fights or arguments here because I can easily get deported, because it's a completely different podcast about the gut system here in Korea. So if a foreign person is attacked and we fight back, we get in trouble most of the time. Like, we will get deported and nothing will happen to the other person. So I try to be very careful about my confrontation. But recently I started at a new gym, and they're more hands-on in terms of assisting me in my one-to-one training. And the thing that threw me was when my coach was just like, may I touch you? May I touch your body in order to show you how to do X, Y, and Z? He asked me permission. And it really blew my mind, because that's one of the first times a man actually asked me permission to touch me instead of just doing it. And it was right then, like, even with my most recent partner, we're not together, but he was very astute where things got heated and I was still mad at him and I didn't want to really do it. But I'm like, whatever. He actually looked at me and he stopped and he's like, listen, I can tell that you're not fully into this. We don't have to do this right now. Like, I can wait. And he stopped, he rolled over and he's like, listen, let's just cuddle and talk. And that blew my mind. I'm like, wait, you stopped? You just want to talk after, wait, what? And it was just, that was like the first time that has ever happened. And I'm just like, wow, you actually took notice of my facial features, of my reactions, that I didn't want to do this 100%. And I wasn't fully into it. And you stopped, even though you were super heated. And I was just like, wow, the fact that this was a surprise to me, that a man can actually control himself, really blew my mind. And it's just like, wow, how many times I've actually been through where the man just didn't care. It wasn't like they didn't notice. It's like they noticed, but they just didn't care and they did it anyway. And that is a very weird and hurtful realization to come to, but it just puts my mind in a different perspective of how I need to handle these situations going forward, establishing more boundaries and stuff that I'm working through, and what I need to teach if I have like younger girls or boys around me who ask me for advice. I can now teach them and use from my experience, like, listen, this is like, yes, this is no, this is consent, this is whatever, this is how you should be treated, and don't settle for less. So like, how did you learn about like the boundaries and stuff like that? Like, was that something that was taught to you, or did you have to learn that yourself?
To be 100% honest, I can't recall specific instances where I was taught about consent and saying, like, your body is your own. You don't have to move forward with actions or activities that make you uncomfortable. I know that my mom was a big advocate for making sure that I asserted my boundaries with other people. But I also know that I just inherently, I've always been very protective of my personal space. I will make it very well known if I'm not comfortable in a situation. My facial expressions will contort animatedly, so that you're more repulsed by what I'm doing. So, if anything, I've learned to internalize what repulses people and use it as a weapon to keep myself safe. So, for example, and this is going to be kind of weird, but I'm going to share it, and it's not meant to be a criticism, but it happened. So when I was in high school, I used to walk, a good distance from my elementary school, or not rather my elementary school, my karate studio back home. And, I was a very happy, upbeat person, very expressive. So I'm smiling, I'm bouncing as I walk, I'm just being very carefree and not very aware of my surroundings. And a family member of mine witnessed me without my knowledge on my commute. And they approached me later on that week and say, hey, I saw you walking the other day. I'm like, oh, well, how come you didn't say hi? Like, oh, I would have said hello to you. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. And they're like, well, I really think you shouldn't smile as much when you're walking. And I'm kind of confused because that's just how I walk. That's how I express myself when I'm commuting places. And they say, because you look like a target. Now, what they were expressing to me, and I learned this later on, was that my open and honest exterior is like a beacon for people to gravitate toward me and try to engage me in conversation or interactions. Um, Older men in particular felt very inclined to approach me randomly on the street and tell me how pretty I was, or tell me how big my smile was, or, oh, go ahead, happy girl, I see you, making random comments to me. And of course, at the
Mm.
time, I didn't understand why.
Yeah.
But from that moment on, I started to notice, like, yes, my demeanor is starting to attract unwanted attention from other people. Like, I did not ask you to come approach me. I didn't ask you to talk to me. I don't know you, so go away. And I learned very quickly that if my face was stoic, or if I had more of like a not necessarily mean or scowling face, but I'll say a resting bitch face, um, people were less likely to approach me without my consent, or
Hmm.
talk to me or try to get my attention, because they see that I'm not approachable. And I've internalized that now to the point where I
Mm.
don't even mean to have that face slide on when I'm in public, but it just happens. And it's a protective measure that I've internalized.
Hmm.
And it's one of those weird situations where when you stop to think of why you do what you do, you have learned, or I have learned, to adapt to my environment as a way of protecting myself from perceived threats. I've been followed by people because they thought that they could come and speak to me and pursue me for my phone number or any kind of attention that I was willing to give.
Hmm.
Most times I'm a smile and nod kind of person and say, have a good day, as a way to deter them from taking any kind of negative action against me, because I could very easily flip them the bird or tell them to F off. I
Yeah.
could. But that comes also with another degree of danger or
Yeah.
confrontation that I'm not willing to confront, especially if I have somewhere to go. So the
Hmm.
easiest way for me is to have my resting bitch face on, or, look at them quickly, smile briefly, nod, and say, have a good day, and then keep moving as quickly as possible, hoping that they won't pursue me further.
Keyword hoping.
Mm-hmm.
Hoping.
Hoping.
Because that's definitely a whole we can do another whole conversation about that as well. Is
Mm.
the art of saying no as a woman to pursuers.
Oh no.
The art of saying, yeah, the art of saying no as a woman, in terms of like someone's approaching you off the street. Like, what many guys don't realize is how terrifying that is for us. But I'm not going to digress into that, because we can probably go on for a long while on that. So at the end of the day, the whole purpose of our entire like episode, and I think this was a really good episode to start on, even though it's like a very touchy subject to begin our podcast on, but I think it's definitely something that's very important, considering we are both women. We are both women of color as well, and just this topic is something that many people just don't want to have the conversation about. So we're sitting here and we're having this conversation. At the end of the day, consent is consent, no is no, yes is yes, and anything in between, just assume it as a no, unless they absolutely say, yes, I want to do this, or no, I don't want to do this. And you need to take that into consideration and stop pushing the boundary because you aren't getting the reaction that you want. Because if this person says no, just find somebody else that will say yes. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not that hard. She says no, okay, cool. Fine, talk to somebody else. Stop being lazy. Like, grow
Exactly.
up. Grow up. Anyway, so as we come to a close, are there any last words of advice or things that you would like to say to our listeners?
I do, actually. I will leave you all with two messages. The first of which is, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And you just move on. It's
Mhm.
better for everyone, and you keep your dignity intact. I promise you it will save you from so many embarrassing situations and potentially earning yourself an unwarranted title.
Yes.
And for those of us that are establishing our boundaries and trying very hard to find strength within ourselves when we're confronted with these situations that involve consent, I will share with you a post from one of my favorite Instagram posters by the name of a Black female therapist. Remember your personal rights. I have the right to rest. I have a right to privacy. I have a right to change my mind. I have a right to be treated with respect. I have a right to expect honesty from others. And most importantly, I have the right to say no to things I can't or don't want to do. These are your personal rights and your boundaries. Assert them as often as possible.
Beautifully said, beautifully shared. And just a reminder, as my last little tidbit, to anyone who is listening, you are loved, you are valued, you are worthy, and you deserve nothing but the best. Do not be afraid to establish yourself. Do not be afraid to say no, because there are people out here who are here for you, and we want to help, and we want to make sure you are good. So we got you, fam. We got you.
We got you.
Thank you for joining us on our first episode of Melanin Muses. This is Callie.
And
this is not Callie. I'm not Callie. I'm looking at you, Callie. But this is Cleo.
And this is Callie.
We'll see you next time.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Callie here. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. To continue listening to us, like, subscribe, and comment on our YouTube channel. If you want some behind-the-scenes content, the links to our social media channels are in the description box below. Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Search Melanin_Muses. That's MELANIN_MUSES. See you guys next week.